Hi, I'm Sidney Blumenthal of the Court of History on Legal AF. I'm here with my partner, Sean Wilentz of Princeton, and we're here to discuss why Vice President J.D. Vance is completely full of it, perhaps not because he was recently in Greenland, but about the idea that a president can defy a Supreme Court order and that the precedent is bloody, bloody Andrew Jackson and bloody, bloody and Donald Trump can do whatever he wants because of Andy Jackson. And Sean has written a brilliant piece everyone should read in the New York Review of Books, completely debunking that falsifying historian, if he can be called that, J.D. Vance. Sean, where does J.D. Vance get it wrong?
Every which way. But I mean, even to equate Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump by calling them both bloody, bloody is already an insult to poor Andrew Jackson. But we'll move on from there. Some years ago, J.D. Vance, when he was working his way up to become the vice presidential nominee, it was years before, was on a right-wing podcast. And he proposed that the next president, who he hoped would be Donald Trump, the next president should immediately upon taking office fire the entire workforce, mid-level bureaucratic workforce in the federal government. Just fire them. In fact, this has come to pass. He was predicting, but at any rate, and he based it. He understood that such a move might get the Supreme Court a little bit upset, so that he said that if the Supreme Court told the president that he could not do this, well, he should do what Andrew Jackson did and stand up and say that the Supreme Court justice, the Chief Justice, has made his decision. Now let him enforce it.
Well, where does this come from, Sean?
Well, Well, it comes from actually. It's rooted in an actual case in 1832, Worcester v. Georgia, but it was the actual quotation that he was borrowing from is made up. It's fake. It was made up by Horace Greeley, who is not a particular fan of Andrew Jackson.
Who was Horace Greeley?
Horace Greeley was the editor of the largest newspaper, most widely read newspaper in America in the 1840s and 50s, the New York Tribune. But he's also a hater of Andrew Jackson. And when it came to talking about the American, it was a book that he published in 1864-65 about the coming of the Civil War and about the Civil War itself. And he was going after Jackson for his Indian policy, quite rightly, but he made up this quotation. It has since resounded throughout the annals of American history as something that Jackson actually said. He never actually said it. But the question is less the words themselves and what they might actually mean. What Vance took it to mean was that Jackson was saying that the executive branch, right, could just say, you can't enforce your rulings, Supreme Court, so go ahead and try. You can't force yourself on me. And in doing so, defied the Supreme Court directly.
This is perfect originalism, Sean.
Oh, well, yeah, it is.
It's completely made up history in order to judge a preconceived result that you want. And that's the essence of originalism. But here...
I don't want to tax poor Horace Greeley being an originalist. But anyway, go ahead.
Would never have occurred to him since the founders never thought of themselves as originalists. But here we are with J.D. Vance, and he's made this up, and it's gained enormous currency on the right. And it's incredibly dangerous, isn't it?
It very much is. I mean, you just look at the case itself, Worcester v. Georgia in 1832. This was a case in which the federal government was not even a part of. He was not party to, let alone the executive branch. There was no order for Jackson to defy in 1832. The whole thing is just crazy. But again, fake history is, you see it on the court, you see it now in the Trump administration. Fake history is a way of taking off, and unless they are checked, unless they are refuted, then it actually attains a kind of truth to it. So that's why I wrote this piece. I mean, not for the fun of showing off how much history I know. It was to point out once again that these ideas, these very right-wing ideas, being cloaked in history, well, we have to remove the cloak.
Yeah, well, Trump likes to wrap himself in the mantle of, I think, two presidents. One of them is Jackson, and the other is William McKinley. Two very different characters. But as somebody who has written extensively about Andrew Jackson, even wrote a book called Andrew Jackson, and he figures in your Rise of American Democracy quite prominently. What would Andrew Jackson have thought of Donald Trump, the faux populist who was enriching himself and installing oligarchs as a new American aristocracy?
Yeah. Well, on two fronts. I mean, poor Andrew Jackson's, Jackson was a flawed president to say the least. So we don't want to say that he was perfect. However, on two matters, the idea of Donald Trump aping Andrew Jackson, it leaves me speechless, actually, to think about it. One is the question of the oligarchy, as you were talking about, Sid. This rich inherited kid who came along, blew all the money, the $500 million that his father gave him, blew it all, and then thinks that enables him, that's entitles him to become president of the United States. On that score, Andrew Jackson would have been horrified because he was very much a man who came up from nothing. He was born in a very hard scrabble. He actually earned his way to the top, unlike Donald Trump. That's the personal factor. But he also despised what he called monopoly, what he called the money power. What he saw as the privileged who already had money and already had power were using their own connections in order to ingratiate themselves or to enrich themselves at the expense of the American people. He dedicated his presidency, a large part of his presidency, to breaking that money power monopoly. Secondly, although he certainly expanded executive power beyond what some of his political enemies thought right, they called him an enemy of the Constitution, he believed in the Constitution very, very deeply. To the point where, as you know as well as anyone having studied Lincoln, aside from Abraham Lincoln, it was Andrew Jackson more than anyone who stood up for the Constitution against the lower South, fractious lower South slavocrats who were talking about nullification and secession. By the way, an element of which has ended up creeping into the Trump coalition, that idea. Andrew Jackson detested all of that. He was a true nationalist and he truly believed in the Constitution. So for that alone, I mean, I could try to think of a joke to make fun of this, but Trump is just, it's practically blasphemous in a kind of secular way for him to be taking on Andrew Jackson as his hero.
Well, there are a lot of elements to the nullification crisis that Jackson fought. In some ways, the first battle of the Civil War against John C. Calhoun,
right,
who was the arch Lucifer figure of South Carolina and the prefiguring of secession and breaking up the Union.
Right.
And nullification, in a curious way, has transformed itself into this debate. The idea of nullification was that a state was sovereign and that the United States and the federal government did not have overall power over the states to enact any national policy. And interestingly, the pretext used was the tariff. Mm-hmm. And that's what Calhoun used as an excuse. Right. And Jackson said it was all about the slave oligarchy. Jackson himself a slave owner. So, but back to where I'm going on nullification. Mm-hmm. This was Calhoun wanted to use this for a state to nullify a federal policy. Now, mm-hmm. J.D. Vance proposes that Donald Trump nullify the judiciary in order to empower, with absolute power, a unitary executive in the persona of Donald Trump. So, so there's some roots to this.
Yeah, well, one is nullification over the separation of powers, and one is nullification over the division of powers. But it's still the idea that of nullification, the nullification of absolutely justified, legitimate laws. I mean, yes, and to which leads us to what Abraham Lincoln, your friend Abraham Lincoln, described in his first inaugural address. Huh?
He's right over here.
Yes, in his first inaugural address, he was talking about secession, but he meant nullification as well. He described it as the essence of anarchy. That's what you end up with from this position. But it's an anarchy into which people like Donald Trump, strongmen, can stand in and take over. That's what's really going on here. It's undoing the constitutional rule of law in order for a strong man to come in. That's what's happening as far as I can see.
Well, it goes to another point, which is that the concentration of unchecked and untrammeled power leads not to complete security, but in fact disorder, or what Lincoln called anarchy. And that's certainly what animated the framers of the Constitution and why they created a government of divided powers.
Yeah, I mean, if men were angels, as James Madison said, we would need no government. But men are not angels, and if you entrust power to a person who says he's the only one who can solve this problem, then you're going to end up with not anarchy. You're going to end up with despotism, and they were very well aware of that. I mean, that runs throughout the thinking of the late 18th century, a thinking I wish we could revive in some way.
Yeah, Trump. Lately, in his interview with The Atlantic, says he's the ruler of the world. That's quite a presumption, given that he has, in a little more than 100 days, we're at 101 as we speak, created the greatest self-induced anarchy and disorder of any president at the beginning of his term in our history.
No question about that. But again, I think it's directed. It's a purposeful chaos. It's chaos that he can come in and take over and say that he is going to pull it together. Now, he may in the process destroy himself. We'll see. That's the story of our shows for a very long time to come, I'm afraid. But yeah, I mean, the idea of division of checks and balances and so forth runs against the grain of everything that Donald Trump stands for. Okay. Now, but at the same time, we have seen what happens to Donald Trump when he has no checks and balances. He builds the Taj Mahal. He goes bankrupt. He brings everybody down with him. A man without checks and balances ends up the way that Donald Trump has ended up in the past, and we have to make sure that he doesn't bring us down there again.
Well, on that note, and we'll continue on the Court of History, we will have further discussions. And thank you, Sean, for that insight into Andrew Jackson.
My pleasure, Sidney. Keep on doing it.
All right. And that's it for the Court of History for now.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.